Please welcome Politico's senior Washington correspondent and playbook co-author, Rachael Bade, and Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson.
Okay. So last time I sat down with Speaker Johnson, my colleague and I were told we'd have about 15 to 20 minutes with him. But lucky for us, he had just drank a massive cup of coffee and he stayed for an hour and talked for an hour.
I didn't know I could get out earlier. Somebody told me.
In that vein, and hoping we will get lucky today, I have asked our events team to please bring out some coffee.
Bless your heart. Thank you.
Wow, it's even steamy.
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. Given that it seems increasingly likely that Republicans are going to have a trifecta in 2025, controlling both the White House but also Congress, I am super excited to sit down with the man who is going to be driving that Republican 2025 agenda. But before we get to that, let's start with some news of the day. It seems like we are now on the cusp of Joe Biden dropping out of the presidential race. We got reports last night that Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries have privately asked him to end his campaign. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi also confronted the president and has been sort of working behind the scenes to get him out. Some Republicans, including at the Heritage Foundation and at least one of my sources at the RNC, have indicated that if this does come to pass and Biden steps aside to allow another Democrat atop the ticket, that Republicans will fight this legally. I'm wondering what you make of that, given that you are an attorney. Is there a case to be made here?
It's a great question. I mean, we're looking into all the alternatives. We cease to be amazed by anything anymore. It's just we live in surreal times. I mean, none of this could have been scripted even a few months ago, but we adapt to it as it occurs. Look, I will say the Democrats pride themselves on being the party of small d democracy. You know, they talk about it incessantly, and they claim that we are not, which is absurd. If they go about the process of having a few people in a back room make this magical decision and kick their candidate off the ballot, it defies all the work that's been done for 14 months. I mean, they went through the democratic process, the small d process, and they chose Joe Biden. I mean, he's the duly selected candidate for president for re-election, and I don't know how they can just wave a magic wand and make it all go away without violating at least some great tradition and probably some statutory law itself, at least in some of these states. So it'll be a very interesting turn of events. We'll have to see what occurs.
Do you know much about some of these laws in the swing states that you guys might be citing to say he can't come off the ballot?
Well, I mean, there's some preliminary research being done, of course. I'm not, election law is not my specialty, although we all need to develop the specialty now. We'll see what happens. I think that, you know, every state has its own unique system, as we know. That's kind of the beauty of our system and our federalist system. And there's some very unique statutes out there, and there's some real impediments to just making an easy switch like that. So I think in the states where it could be contested, I expect that it will be, and they'll have an interesting battle on their hands.
Is there a role for House Republicans when it comes to any sort of legal challenge?
Well, I mean, we'll see. Primarily, this is handled at the state level, and we don't federalize our elections. We have some say constitutionally over federal elections in terms of some of the parameters, but the time, place, and manner and the details has always been left to the states. So that's why there's literally 50 different systems on how it's done. So it will take small armies of lawyers in all these different regions to figure this out.
So perhaps not the House Counsel. So when we last sat down with you, you mentioned that President Biden, from your view and your sort of negotiations with him behind the scene, he'd basically lost a step, but you wouldn't disclose specifics. Now that we have all seen with our own eyes what is going on, will you talk to us about specifically what you witnessed when you were in conversations with President Biden?
Yeah, I mean, some of this has been reported, not by me, it's just other people were aware of the conversations, but one in particular that's drawn a lot of attention, in fact, was in a big story in the Wall Street Journal that was maligned until everyone saw the debate. A couple of weeks earlier, they reported on this incident I had where I had been demanding, many of you know, since in the Hill press corps, you're in and around it, for about 8 weeks, beginning in early January or maybe late December, the staff of the White House was unable to schedule a meeting at my request with the president. And that was alarming. First, it was sort of frustrating, and then it became rather alarming because we had some big matters of national security that the Speaker of the House and the President should discuss. And the border was one, but there was some other really pressing matters, and the subjects now don't matter so much as what happened. For 8 weeks, they stonewalled me, and I got frustrated, and I went to our leadership press conference that the next morning, and I said, hey, everyone should be aware the Speaker of the House is not allowed to meet with the President anymore, apparently. If that bothers anyone, it should, and maybe you should let them know about it. They caught some attention over that, and then he called the famous meeting. He relented and invited me to the White House, but that was the meeting where Kamala was there, and Chuck Schumer and Hakeem and Leader McConnell, and it was set to be an ambush about the Ukraine issue, which was not even a necessary conversation. At the end of that, the middle of it, the President famously said, why don't y'all just give the Speaker and I a little bit of time together? And it occurred to me, they did not want that to happen. Now we all know why. He's not on his A game. I don't know, I try to practice Christian charity. I don't want to be, this is not personal, but we all see now what I saw and what all of us have been seeing for some time that are in close proximity, that he's just not, I don't believe he's fit for the job right now. I say it that way. And so we had this meeting, and it was, I won't tell you all the details because it doesn't matter, but the point is the subjects that we were discussing, it became very clear to me that he was not well in tune with these very important matters. And in fact, he had a great misunderstanding about a couple of very important matters, and I walked away from the meeting feeling very alarmed about that, because I know that our adversaries see that weakness as well. And I take no pleasure in saying it. I want the commander-in-chief of whichever party to be a strong individual that exerts strong leadership on the world stage, because it's important not only for our national security, but for the stability of our allies and freedom all around the world. We just had the NATO summit last week, in Washington, and the leaders of all of our allied nations are just as concerned about this as we are, or more, because some of them are in closer proximity to the real danger. And the aggressors that have been more provocative now because of this situation. So it's got to be remedied. It needs to happen yesterday, and the Democrats have a real problem on their hands.
So speaking of that, you have suggested that the cabinet should consider invoking the 25th Amendment to force Biden out, asking them to, quote, search their hearts and do their duty. If Biden does decide to step aside from the top of the ticket, do you think that means he's got to resign right now from office?
It's not my decision to make. I mean, obviously the 25th Amendment, the fourth clause is the one we're all talking about. It's never been invoked before, but it allows a break the glass moment where the vice president can consult with the cabinet of that president, and they can make a determination that he or she is no longer suited for the office, not able to do the job, and then he or she can contest it. At that point, if there's an impasse between the two, constitutionally, then it comes to the House to determine, to Congress to determine it. Until that step, it's not really my opinion doesn't really matter. I was pressed on the question. I didn't really want to go there because I'm a constitutional law guy, and it's not my lane. But they said, somebody gave me the hypothetical. If you were in the Biden cabinet, what would you do? Well, I would be concerned about it, and I would probably be contemplating evoking the fourth clause of the 25th Amendment, and that's how that whole story started. So I'm not advising them. That's their problem. I think it's a problem that they themselves created, because I think the people in his close orbit knew about his mental acuity when they ran him for office, and they've been hiding this for quite some time. And so I think they created their own dilemma.
Have you heard much from your Democratic colleagues on the Hill, private griping about this? What are you hearing? From Democrats, specifically.
Yes, they're very concerned. They should be. Last week was a phenomenon. On Thursday and Friday, I walked almost totally unimpeded through the hallways of Congress. The media wasn't chasing me with cameras and microphones for the first time since I became Speaker in October. And it was quite an interesting
Enjoy
phenomenon.
It while it lasts.
Yes, it was great. Yeah. Had a reprieve for 2 days. But I called Hakeem Jeffries, my counterpart, and said, how's it feel, man? They've got a real problem on their hands, and I think there's a lot of hand-wringing, because a lot of these people, particularly those who are in tight races to be reelected, they know that there's a real serious down-ballot effect involved here, and they're worried about their own political careers. And so, those parochial interests, I think, take precedent in some of their minds, and they're really worried.
Last question on this, then we'll move on. Your own members are a bit divided about how to handle this meltdown we're seeing in the Democratic Party. You have members like Jamie Comer and Chip Roy who sort of want to seize on it, have these high-profile hearings about Biden's mental fitness for office, maybe force some Democrats to take votes regarding a sense of, the House on the 25th Amendment. And then you have others like Jim Jordan who think that Republicans should just sort of sit back and let Democrats just sort of implode. I'm sure you have a thought on this. What is it? Which strategy is right?
I mean, I have a lot of thoughts. You can look at it politically. You can make an argument for either one, but the Speaker of the House has a higher responsibility than just the politics. I'm not suggesting that those guys are just thinking of politics. They want to do the right thing, but the overriding concern in my mind is what is the right thing, the safest thing for the country? We have ourselves an unprecedented situation here. I mean, there's never been a scenario like this when you have hot wars around the globe, you have very aggressive adversaries, they're ready to pounce, anything could happen at any moment, and you have the weakest president in the Oval Office in memory, probably in the history of the country. So what is the right thing for all of us as Americans? Put aside the politics of it. What is the safest thing for us to do? I'm not sure I know the answer to that, but that ought to be the question that all of us are asking.
That sounds like you're open to hearings and making this a big part of the House, what the House is going to do in the fall.
Well, look, there's real vulnerability right now. I mean, maybe some of you have seen some of these national interviews I've done. When we talk about this, I always try to clarify and look right into the camera and say, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea need to be aware the American people and the U.S. military are ready to defend our interests at any moment. Do not confuse the palace intrigue around what's happening with Joe Biden as an individual with the resolve of the American people. Please, I mean, this is, we can't project weakness for more than we are.
Oh, interesting. So by showcasing how weak he is, that might have the reverse.
Yes, I'm probably telling you more than I should, but I mean, these are the calculations. We have to think about the nation's best interest first, and this is a serious situation, and there is no playbook that one can follow. We're in unprecedented times. We're in uncharted waters. We've got to think very carefully and decisively about how we proceed.
So last night we got to know J.D. Vance, Trump's new running mate, a little bit, and I hear over the last few days you've had some private meetings with him. Tell us about these meetings with him. I mean, what's your sort of chemistry?
Well, let me start with his address last night. I thought it was fantastic. I got to sit next to his mom, and they came and sat her next to me in the box, and I thought she was a donor, some big heavy hitter donor or something. And I introduced myself, I said hello, and she said hi. I said, where are you from? I thought I was supposed to know her, and she said, I'm J.D. Vance's mom. I said, oh, it's amazing. Fantastic. Did you talk to President Trump? She said, I've never met him. I said, well, let's remedy that. So, Mr. President, it's JD's mom. He's like, oh, it's fantastic, great. So you're going to and then she sits down and she's, she reacted very much like my own mom would in that situation. And so I was just felt endeared to her. And what a story. I mean, what a life story he has. It's incredible. Yeah. She had him, she told me when she was, I think, 22 years old. And, his story's famous. He shared it last night. And she's been recovering from addiction for almost 10 years. And here it is, this journey of their lives from Appalachia and the humble beginnings, and now her son gets nominated to be the Vice President of the United States, and she's just overwhelmed with emotion, and I'm getting overwhelmed. I'm like, don't cry on national television, don't cry on national television, because it was really a special moment. She's like, that's my baby boy. I'm like, yes, ma'am, he is, and it was great. It was just it's a great American story. JD represents that. He's a super smart guy. He's got deep conviction. He's a great communicator, and he understands the plight of the American worker and the middle class and the lower class. And JD and I have very similar stories of our upbringing. It's a powerful thing to have somebody on the stage who can look right into the eyes and the hearts of the people and address the issues that concern them most. And that Rust Belt and that Midwest sensibility that he brings to it is really a powerful thing, and I think he's going to be a great addition to the ticket.
And what about your personal conversations with him? Were you talking policy? Like, do you guys bond over a certain sports thing that is way over my head? But I don't know.
Yeah, we actually have a lot in common, and we riffed a little bit about policy, but primarily because we just had an abbreviated time here the last couple of days since it's happened. But yesterday we met for, I don't know, a half hour and talked about the plan going forward, that we should have we don't put the cart before the horse, but if all this turns out the way that it looks that it may, we'll have unified government and a real moment to unify the country, and part of that will be our legislative agenda. So we have to have a very well-planned and aggressive first 100 days agenda for the Congress and then the days that follow. And so that takes a lot of careful thought and planning. And we're going about that right now. And I told JD, I said, this could be a very powerful thing to have someone who comes out of the Senate and is fresh from the legislative process, understands it, and is, super intelligent about these things, that the House and the Senate, aligning with the president, he could be a very involved vice president. Many who hold that office have not been, but he could be very instrumental in all of us moving the country forward together. And I think that could be a powerful thing. I told President Trump, I said, Mr. President, in your second term, you could very well be the most consequential president of the modern era. Y'all probably heard me say this, because we have to fix everything. But to do that, we can't waste a moment, and I think JD can be a very important part of preparing that playbook, so to speak, and then running the plays when we get the ball.
So it's interesting to hear all this praise from you of Vance, because he does have a slightly different worldview from a lot of traditional Republicans, right? I mean, last night in his speech, he railed against free trade agreements. He didn't mention cutting taxes once, which is a huge priority for you guys. And at times when he was sort of attacking corporations, there was a lot of analysts on TV saying he kind of sounded like Bernie Sanders. So, I mean, you are a self-described Reagan Republican. I mean, what do you make of that? Some of this conflicts with your own worldview.
Yeah, it does, but as he said in his speech last night, I loved what he said. He said, debate and thoughtful discussion and even disagreement is part of the process, and we embrace it. I loved when he said that. I was probably the loudest applause in the room. There's a biblical admonition about this we've talked about. So as iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpeneth another. Disagreement is part of the process. I mean, in a constitutional republic, it anticipates it. It's the way you have that. You go to the table and you arm wrestle over these issues and you reach consensus and you reach the idea that moves the ball forward for the most people. So it's a healthy thing to have that inside the camp and to have different perspectives on some of these issues. I welcome the debate, and he'll be a formidable debating opponent when we disagree, but I think it'll be healthy for the party, and I respect his views.
I'm going to come back to policy in a second, but let's turn to a more sobering topic. Saturday's assassination attempt of former President Trump. A lot of Republicans have told me and my colleagues that they've reached out to him, sent him text messages, but you are one of the few elected Republicans who've actually had extended FaceTime with him this week. From what you can see, how is he doing?
I think he's in a great place. I think, in his heart and in his head, he's in a place where you would want a future president to be in a moment like we're facing for the country. What do I mean by that? Well, we're in uncharted waters in so many ways. We're facing all these unprecedented challenges. You want your president to be deep and contemplative. And you can see it on President Trump's face right now. That's where he's at. I mean, anybody who gets shot in the face that would be where they are. And he gave a brief remarks to a group, I think yesterday morning, and somebody sent me the video. I wasn't in the room, but he said that going through something like that gets your attention, obviously, and it makes you think about God in a different way. I don't want to misquote him, but it was something to that effect. And he believes he was providentially spared for this moment, and I do as well. And I talked with him on Sunday, after the event, about the hand of providence. I certainly believe that. I believe our first president, George Washington, believed it. The founders did. Washington was famously in the French and Indian War. You remember the war where we used to call him the bulletproof president. And he went through this barrage of gunfire in an ambush in the woods in 1755. And the Indians all shot at him, and he lost 2 horses beneath him, grabbed a 3rd horse, finished the battle. He was a young Army colonel at the time. It's a cool story from history. He gets off the horse, and he has bullet holes in his vest. 4 bullet holes, and he was unscathed. So he writes home to his family. He's processing this, and he says, "The divine hand of providence saved me on this day." And he further explains that he felt that he must have something more to do. We know the story now. I was so moved by that Saturday night, as soon as we knew that President Trump was safe, I remembered the story immediately, and I went back, pulled out the history book to read it, because it had been a long time. And it struck me. That event that I just described took place less than 50 miles from where Donald Trump was shot in Pennsylvania on Saturday. It happened also in Pennsylvania, also in July, 1755. Coincidence, maybe, but I told President Trump, I think it's providence. I think God governs in the affairs of men, as Benjamin Franklin said, and there's something going on here. The president is weighing the history of the moment. He's weighing his responsibility and his role in this, and I am so looking forward to his address tonight, because I think it's going to be momentous. I think it's going to be historic. I think he's going to talk about unifying the country, which is what he's implied. He changed the content of the speech. that's exactly what the country needs to hear right now, and he's the person who could deliver that, and it's going to be a very important moment for all of us.
You mentioned faith and God's guiding hand on the country. Do you believe that Donald Trump is a man of God?
Well, look, I'll tell you, our conversations over the last, well, yes, I do. I believe he believes in God. We've talked about that many times in the past. I shared a story, I might as well say it here. I shared a story to a big group this morning, so I'm sure it'll be out. In November, my sons almost drowned in the Atlantic, right outside Mar-a-Lago. We were down there for, I was doing some fundraising events at Palm Beach, and we had dinner with President Trump. It was the week of Thanksgiving, that's how I remember it. My boys were out of school. Jack and Will, they're 18 and 13, and they were with me on the trip, and they wanted to have dinner with President Trump. So he was gracious. We spent a couple of hours dinner. It's just Susie Wiles were there and a couple others, maybe 6 of us. The next morning, I was doing some fundraising events, and the boys were on Thanksgiving break for school, so they were out on the beach, and they're great athletes, and they swim all the time in the ocean. But a current got them and pulled them out to sea, a rip current. And we almost lost both of my sons. It was a harrowing event. I won't go into all the details, but they both almost drowned. My 18-year-old son was holding his 13-year-old son, my 13-year-old son above the water. The 18-year-old almost drowns, and then little brother almost drowns. And the only reason they're alive today is because right before the 13-year-old's head goes under, a parasailer happens to be going by, sees them, goes to the beach, jet skis go out. Many hours and hospital visitations later, they're totally fine.
Wow.
So President Trump, we decamp and go back to Louisiana to recover, and the next night President Trump calls me. He said, Mike, I won't do it in his voice, I'm sorry. Here,
No, do it. Please do it in his voice.
Right? Okay,
Yeah.
okay. I get so in trouble for this, but he goes, Mike, we almost lost those beautiful, perfect American boys. I'm like, yes, Mr. President. He said, Mike, they're saying it's like a miracle. What happened? So I told him the whole story. And he said, Mike, I mean, think of it. It'd be so tragic. I mean, think of it. It's like you wouldn't even have Thanksgiving. You know, it was like Thanksgiving week. I said, true. I mean, you might never have a Thanksgiving again. That's true, Mr. President. It resonated in his heart so deeply because he's so close to his boys, to his children, right? And we talked about this multiple times after, in the months after. He was so moved by that, as I was, as a father, and he said, you know, God saved your sons. And I said, yes, he did, Mr. President. So I reminded him of that on Sunday after his event. I said, yeah, just like God saved my boys, now he saved you as well. And he agreed. It was like a centimeter's difference. We're having a different conversation today. You know, you get that close to death, that'll get anybody's attention, and I think he's thinking very deeply about that. I'm not going to, you can quote him in his own words. I think he's going to talk about it tonight. He said it in an audience yesterday morning. You have a different perspective of God, and I think that's a real serious thing to him right now, as it would be to any of us.
Yeah, I'm sure that's going to be met with some skepticism,
Well, hey.
given he's not much of a churchgoer.
Well,
but
but
see.
you know, people can sniff a phony, and I think he's being very authentic about this, and I think it's going to resonate with people.
So you've called for the Secret Service director to resign. You're going to be creating this bipartisan task force in Congress, well, in the House, to investigate. You've also been briefed on the TikTok of last Saturday, from my understanding. We are starting to see reports here and there of different things coming out, right? The shooter was researching Biden as well as Trump. We saw reports that the Secret Service resources may have been diverted to protect Jill Biden, who was also in the state at the time. We've heard that local police told the Secret Service they didn't have the resources to protect that roof, and yet somehow that roof was still not protected, even though Secret Service knew this. Is there anything more that hasn't started to trickle out that you can tell us to make sense of what happened on Saturday?
I wish I could. The classified parts are even more alarming than what we've heard so far. It's completely inexcusable. I had Secretary Mayorkas on the phone Saturday within hours of the event. He didn't have any answers for me. I asked a very simple question that many of you would ask if you had the Secretary of DHS on the phone after that event. Mr. Secretary, where were the drones? I mean, we do drones as standard practice for almost every outdoor event now. A drone would have certainly spotted this guy on the roof. I mean, like, what? He didn't have any answers that night. Look, we have a lot more questions than answers. We are going to have a classified briefing next week, ASAP. I told the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, and Director Cheadle of Secret Service, they need to be prepared and be at our ready next week, because we're going into the classified setting with all the House members. We're going to sit there as long as necessary to ask and answer all those questions. We're putting together a task force that'll be bipartisan. It'll have subpoena authority so that can strike quickly and get this done. I think it's essential to get the answers to the American people. They deserve it. They're demanding it. And if we don't do that, then these conspiracy theories will flourish, and that's even more dangerous. Clearly, there were serious lapses. I did say that I keep calling her Secretary, Director Cheadle should resign She shows no interest in doing that. And so this morning I called the White House and said, the president needs to fire her. Show some leadership, for goodness sakes, Mr. President. I didn't talk to him. They wouldn't let me on the phone with him, of course, but I let my word be known there, my opinion. I think he could do the country a service by giving us a new leader. The accountability starts at the top. We all believe that. We say we do. Now's the time to show it.
I just wanted to follow up on that. Do you think that there's anything House Republicans can do if she doesn't resign, whether it's just some sort of, you can't censure, I don't know if you can censure a member of, the president's internal security, like is there something you're considering?
I don't know, but I'll tell you what, in a bipartisan manner, there is a lot of frustration and question. I think Democrats are just as concerned. You know what, this is a nonpartisan issue. We protect Democrats and Republicans, and everybody knows that. We got to get down to the bottom of it. This is a serious lapse. So we're going to use every tool in the arsenal, and we'll get down to the bottom of it.
So my understanding is there's actually been a lot of tension between Republicans and Secret Service for a while now, beyond this incident on Saturday. Republicans here in town had been pushing Secret Service to actually do more since this spring to make sure this venue is locked down and safe. There was a lot of communication breakdown on that, people refusing to take meetings from my understanding. Is there a concern that the agency's leadership has been polarized or about that there could be some sort of disparate treatment in how President Biden is protected and former President Trump is protected?
Let me just say, gosh, I hope not. I don't want to cast aspersions on Secret Service as an agency because I've not done a deep enough dive into that to make that determination, but that's what these investigations and the hearings will be about. It'll begin next week. The director has been subpoenaed, and I think she's going to comply with that. I certainly encouraged her on the phone yesterday that she better. So we'll get down to the bottom of it. But I will tell you that there is a high degree of mistrust in all of our institutions that were once revered and are so important to our republic. And you cannot maintain a constitutional republic if the people lose their faith in these things. You know, the FBI has been through quite a trial here. I got a lot of my constituents and many of my colleagues who have zero trust in the FBI. I'm almost there myself because of the leadership, not the field agents, but the people at the top. So we need real reform. We've seen the Department of Justice weaponized and lawfare engaged in against political opponents. You cannot do this without having real adverse consequences. And when you have the leaders of the country doubting one of these critical institutions that we have, the Secret Service, for crying out loud, used to be above reproach. It's a real problem, and we're going to have a long time and a hard job, I think, a hard task to rebuild trust in these critical components of the government.
I paused before my last question because I had a question pop up when you were talking, and I couldn't remember what it was. I just remembered. You talked about you're going to get these classified briefings next week, but I mean, the American public really wants to know as much information as possible. Do you think that the administration should declassify this stuff?
Well, yes, 100%, and I'll be pressing for that, and we all will, and we'll demand that those answers get out. It's in everybody's interest let's just admit that there were failures, let's have accountability and move forward and make sure it doesn't happen again. If you let questions hover over this, it's a dangerous thing right now because the country is a tinderbox and people will draw their own conclusions. The facts and the truth will set us free. Let's get it out there. That's my position.
So Trump is now a survivor of gun violence. And so naturally some people, probably not here in Milwaukee, are going to be asking about potential changes to gun control issues. Former President Trump, when he was in the White House, you'll probably recall, he did actually try to strike a gun restriction agreement with Democrats. It ended up falling apart. This was right before the first impeachment. And he even had that public meeting with some Republicans where he said, "You're afraid of the NRA, you're afraid of the NRA." It does seem like Trump over time has sort of flirted with this issue. You are obviously a traditional Republican who is not interested in some sort of additional gun restrictions, but I guess I'm wondering, after being shot at and almost dying, is there anything we could see in a Trump administration regarding reforms on guns?
I don't think anybody's blaming the gun here. I think they're blaming the assailant and the breakdown in the system. I mean, look, I haven't heard anybody talking about that on our side, and I don't think President Trump will be an advocate for it. We don't restrict freedoms of people because some people misuse it, and this was obviously this kid had serious problems. We're getting down to the bottom of that, but I think that's cart before the horse stuff at this point.
Okay, let's talk policy for a bit. So, former President Trump has very much watered down some of the traditional anti-abortion language we have seen in the GOP platform this year. How are you, as a firm pro-lifer, okay with what we saw happen this week on the platform?
Well, the platform doesn't determine our principles. I mean, the principles of the party, I'm proud that the Republican Party is pro-life, and we'll continue to do all the work we always have been to advocate for young mothers and all mothers, for strong families and human flourishing. Look, in my speech on the floor, I evoked the Declaration of Independence, which I'm apt to do because it's our nation's birth certificate, and it states the self-evident truths that all of us are created equal, not born equal, but created equal, and that we believe, and the founders believe, that we were made by a creator and that he's the one that gives us our rights. Why does all that matter to this argument? Because if you're made by your creator and you're made in his image, which they believed and I believe and most of us believe, it means every single person, you heard me say on the floor, has inestimable dignity and value. And your value is not related in any way to the color of your skin or what zip code you live in or where you come from or what your talents are or what you can contribute to society. Your value is inherent because it's given to you by God. I am the product of a teen pregnancy. My mom was 17 years old when I was born. They were high school sweethearts. They dropped out of high school to have me and start a family. I'm really grateful they did. This has always been a real, personal issue to me, and so it will be. But I'm one of 434 colleagues in the House of Representatives. None of us we all come to Congress with our own convictions, but you have to build consensus. And the reality is, in America right now, there is no consensus. Breitbart said politics is downstream from culture. Well, you can't have political consensus on an issue that's this contentious until you get cultural consensus first. So as people who believe in the sanctity of life, we have a lot of work to do to build a culture of life. And in the meantime, our policy will advance the ideals that are stated in the Declaration, and I'm comfortable where we are. There's a strong distinction right now. There's a strong distinction between where the Republican Party stands, where the Democrat Party stands. This is not your grandfather's Democratic Party on this, okay? Every sitting member in the House and the Senate voted for full-term abortion on demand up to the moment of birth, okay? That's way beyond where any European country is or anybody else. It puts us on par with China, North Korea, and some bad guys around the world. I like our position better than the other, and I'll stick with it.
So with the exception of late-term abortion, which the platform, from my understanding, does very, very much call out explicitly, this new position we're hearing from the Republican Party on the issue is, leave it to the states, let them decide how to handle. I know you just said you're comfortable where the party is right now, but doesn't that position effectively mean that the party's okay with blue states deciding to give wide access to abortion?
No, I don't think that's what that means at all. I think that's
leave it to the states.
No, I think it's a recognition of the reality of the politics of the country. The states are handling it, and that, I was one of the lawyers who went into the courts for decades and argued that Roe was an egregiously unconstitutional decision, and part of the argument was because 9 unelected judges pulled the authority away from the states who were legislating on the issue before they evoked Roe and made it claim there's a constitutional right in the federal constitution, which there's not. That's been clarified now. The situation goes back to the people through their duly, elected representatives, and that's the way the process works. No one who believes in the sanctity of life or calls himself a pro-lifer is comfortable with where some of these blue states are going, almost unlimited abortion access all the way to the end, to the moment of birth, like my Democrat colleagues have voted for. But the reality is, as Nikki Haley said in the first presidential debate, you got it, or one of them, she said, there's a 60 vote threshold in the United States Senate. When you can get 60 votes, come talk to me. That's where we are. This is a battle, a discussion, a debate. It has to be had at a local community level through churches, individuals, communities, and people have to talk about this. Who do we want to be as a people? Do we want to respect the dignity of every single life? I think we do. I think that's what's best about America, and that's an important national conversation that we'll be having now.
You said when you get 60 Senate Republican votes, come talk to me. Are you suggesting that if there is a supermajority, then maybe we could see some sort of nationwide abortion-related something?
No, I'm saying the politics follow the cultural consensus, and that was Nikki's response in the debate. I'm paraphrasing her.
Right.
But when she said that, everybody goes, that's right. It doesn't matter what anybody plans or wants. You have to have consensus, and we're a long way away from that.
Okay, let's talk about some other policy issues here. Republicans have been hitting Biden and the Democrats on inflation for a while now, yet former President Trump wants to do a minimum 10% tariff on all imports, 60% tariffs on all goods from China. This will make prices go up for Americans. How are you okay with this as somebody who writes on your website, free markets and free trade agreements allow for innovation, improvement, and economic expansion? These things are very much in contradiction.
That's a brilliant quote. Thank you for reading my website. No, look, I don't think that's President Trump's plan. I think he's floating a lot of ideas out there, and this is how he makes decisions, right? He floats trial balloons, and he gauges reaction. There'll be a lot of thoughtful discussion about trade policy, tariff policy, and all the rest. There's a lot of interest in it. Obviously, we have to take a hard stand against China. They're our number one adversary, and they are trying to build an empire again, and they're being very aggressive and provocative, and they're working in our own hemisphere to undermine us. And trade policy is a big part of that. So there'll be lots of thoughtful discussion, but I mean, he's not put out an economic agenda yet. He's talking about broad ideas. We'll see where all that goes.
I mean, but he's said that that's what he's looking for. Are you trying to talk him out of tariffs?
I ain't talking about nothing yet. Look, we all believe in free trade. He always adds free and fair trade. I agree with that. I mean, we can't compete in the marketplace with one hand tied behind our back. That's what he's talking about. When he says America first, it comes from a very honest place deep in his heart. And we believe that. And what that means is you put your nation's interest first. It makes sense. You take care of your own house before you go out and take care of others. And he's trying to be a good steward of that. And there are different ideas on how we achieve that end, but that'll be part of the vigorous debate that we'll all have.
The national debt right now is $35 trillion, or approaching it, yet the platform doesn't mention it once. I guess I'm wondering how you guys can call yourself the party of fiscal responsibility when, this is not even being talked about anymore.
Oh, it's being talked about. We talk about it all the time.
Okay, you are.
Yeah, well.
But leader of your party certainly isn't.
You judge a party by its actions and the policies it advances and the effects of those policies. And that's why this is going to be a referendum in November, and that's why we're going to win handily. Because right now, the interesting thing about this presidential is you have two men who have actually been president. Even if they replaced Biden with Kamala, she's been in they were a team, right? So you have two administrations that have actually served the people. So people are looking beyond rhetoric and talking points and even platforms, and they're saying, how did both of these administrations do for me and my family? It's not even close. I mean, after the first 2 years of the Trump administration, we had the greatest economy in the history of the world, not just the U.S. I mean, everybody was doing better. Wages were up. Every demographic was moving up. All boats were rising. And the reason is because we implemented some of these policies that we've all believed in. So it's not just talk, it's action. People can evaluate the actions and the results of each of those things for their own families. And I think they're going to make the right choice.
You mentioned action. Social Security and Medicare are going to be running out of reserves in about a decade. And yet at a time when these tough conversations really should be happening, your party's not talking about this at all. And in fact, Donald Trump says entitlement reform should be off the table. How is that realistic?
Well, Medicare and Social Security are now, I think, within a 9-year window of insolvency. It's a very serious situation, and we're about to cross the $35 trillion threshold. 72-point-something% of federal spending is mandatory spending. And so in order to right the ship, you have to evaluate all the factors and make sure that you're doing right by the people. We are the party, and the reason Donald Trump is so insistent about this is he wants to communicate, and I do too, we are the party that wants to preserve Social Security and Medicare for the people. You can't preserve a program that is insolvent. And so there's a lot of ideas on the table that are bipartisan, that the Congress, the next Congress and the ones after that will have to have very thoughtful, deliberate discussions and debate about to try to figure out how to fix these programs so that we can save them. That's what's on the table. And when he means we're not going to touch them, he means we don't want to harm their programs or take benefits away from anybody. There's a way to ensure it, but it'll take bipartisan consensus to do that, and those ideas will become more concrete as we go forward.
So I have a number of questions I still want to get to, but I'm being told that I need to start to wrap up. Well, just ignore the events, people. I want you to take us into the life of Mike Johnson. I mean, you've got 2 kids. You just mentioned them.
We got a bunch of kids. Yeah.
Okay, more than 2 sons. How many?
We have 5, really.
5? How did I not know that? Okay. So you're doing the speakership thing. You've got a family. You've got a fundraise. I mean, what does your typical day look like?
So Newt Gingrich posted an op-ed several weeks ago in the Washington Times, and he said, Speaker Johnson has the most challenging speakership since the Civil War 160 years ago. And I picked up the phone, I'm like, Newt, are you trying to encourage me in some twisted way, man? And he said, no, I said, read the rest of the op-ed. I said, you're doing an excellent job. It's just the job in the modern era is now impossible. And he wrote a book, The Road to the Majority, and he noted in his op-ed, he said, before I became Speaker of the House, I had 16 years to build the infrastructure, the plan, the playbook, the fundraising infrastructure. And he said, poor Johnson had 15 minutes, and he's not wrong about that. But he also noted, and we talked about, the advent of the 24-hour news cycle and social media, which is a toxin to politics, we all know. And Newt and I have talked about this. He said, if my 18-seat majority, I had a 1-vote margin for like 5 months, He said, if I had an 18-vote margin, he said, but if they could have gone online every 2 minutes and told everybody what they didn't like about the contract with America, we probably would not have passed it. I said, that's fair. But we have to adapt to it. This is the modern Congress. So what is the typical day in the life? I mean, no one who is sane would want this job. It really is kind of crazy. I mean, the way that it has evolved in the modern era is the Speaker is responsible for such a huge breadth of things and responsibilities. It's maddening. I mean, it's the legislative agenda, it's the, maintenance of the Capitol grounds, it's the fundraising apparatus, it's the management of all the personalities and, all of that. I spend half my day as Speaker of the House and the other half as a mental health counselor. That's what my day's like. and I sit down with everybody in the office and I'm like, how can we help you be successful today and stay on the team, What's your role on the field for this play, And it's, I don't sleep a lot because it's not allowed, but
how many are you averaging a night, sleep-wise?
I don't know. My wife, Kelly's here. What is it? I don't know, 4 hours maybe? I don't know, 4 or 5? That's rare.
She says 4 or 5, and on a very good night, maybe 6.
Yeah. We actually scheduled it.
You got to learn the power nap. We at Playbook are really good at that, given the hours.
If I go to sleep, there'll be a coup on me. No, I can't sleep. No. It's truly we did schedule a nap for December. It's right after Christmas in December. Yeah. No, it's a lot of work. But and people ask me all the time, "Are you having fun?" This is not fun. Okay, I'm a wartime speaker in a very real sense, and it's a heavy responsibility, but I don't feel burdened by it because I believe genuinely in my heart we're doing the right thing and we're doing it for the right reason, and we got the greatest country in the world on our hands to save, all of us, not just the Speaker, all of us together. And so I kind of feel contemplative like President Trump is feeling right now about the weight of history and where we are in this moment and what our responsibility is. My great solace when I do get my 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night is that, y'all have heard me say before, is I remind myself of the admonition of John Quincy Adams, and he was the hellhound of slavery. He served as president, and then he went and ran for the House after that. I mean, talk about sick in the head, right? But he went and served in the House for a while, and he kept bringing the resolution to end slavery. And he kept failing over and over and over. And so I know where he was sitting on the old House chamber floor, which is now Stat Hall, when they asked him the question.
This guy's a nerd, man.
Oh, I know, I'm sorry. But this is cool, because this younger member of Congress goes up to him and they said, they still called him Mr. President, why do you keep bringing it? Why do you keep bringing it? The resolution to end slavery is not going to pass. And he said, young man, duty is ours, results are God's. And that's a very liberating thought, right? Like all of us, all we can do is our duty, our responsibility, and then at the end of the day, I'm so grateful that I'm not the sovereign and he's in charge, and that's therapy in itself, right? So anyway, I'm very bullish about the future. I think we've gone through a valley. I think it's much brighter on the other side. I think the other side comes after November 5. So that's why I'm still in it.
Well, on that note, we're going to have to leave it there. Mr. Speaker, your security detail over here is giving me the eyes. I can see it. I'm in big trouble. Thank you all for coming, and thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving us the time to do this.